folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio, and this week I'm going to be working on the ON30 Thunder Mesa Mining Company layout. I want to pick up pretty much where we left off last time and bring some power to the rails we laid in the new section, wiring everything up for reliable DCC operations. As you can see, I've been having some fun placing structures and details in place, trying to figure out where everything's going to go on this new section. But right now, I need to take a lot of this stuff off so I can proceed with the wiring and get trains running again on the Thunder Mesa layout. One of the great advantages of rejoining the Thunder Mesa layout with the Goldfield and Calico is that now I can operate both layouts on the same DCC system. I can use separate throttles, but it's all basically the same system. And I'm using an NCE power cab for main layout power. My plan here is just to continue the DCC bus from under the Goldfield and Calico through the new section and into the older sections of the Thunder Mesa Mining Company layout, basically electrically unifying the whole thing, though I can operate them still as different layouts with separate throttles. Of course, there are always a few complications, a few wrinkles to make projects like this a little bit more interesting. And the biggest one here is that I need to power this Y in such a way that I don't short out the entire system. This is a reversing section, so we've got some polarity issues there with the plus going to minus and the minus going to plus. And at the same time, I want to bring power to all of the frogs for all those new turnouts that I installed last time. And I've got a product coming from Tam Valley Depot, which is really going to help out with all that and greatly simplify all of this wiring. But let's cross that bridge when we get there. Right now, I want to go under here and run that DCC bus. Okay, I've tapped into the DCC bus under the Goldfield and Calico and run the 14 gauge wires out through this 1/2 inch hole I just cut through the fascia here. And these will now connect to the wiring bus that's going to run under the entire Thunder Mesa layout. Just need to strip a little bit of insulation off the end of each one of these. Because I'm using these locking terminal connectors between the different sections of the layout. So if I ever need to move it again, it'll be much easier to disassemble. And I like to use this heavy 14 AWG stranded wire for my DCC bus, because remember, it's not only carrying the electrical power, but it's also carrying the digital signal for the locomotives. And I want to run this bus directly beneath the rails of the main line as much as I can. So I've drilled some 1/4 inch holes through these uprights here. Well, I think I'm going to run an entirely new DCC bus under the original Thunder Mesa section as well. I'm looking at it under here, and honestly, it's a bit of a mess and not up to my current standards. So I'm going to redo it while I'm down here. All of this must go. Well, this has been a fun bit of model railroad archaeology, digging under here. I wanted to save some of the feeder wires coming down from the rails, but it's kind of hard to figure out which rail they go to, because when I originally wired this, I used black feeder wires for both rails, which is something I would never do now because it makes this kind of job a lot harder. But now I've figured it out, and I'm marking them, black and red with a piece of tape, so I can reconnect them when I put the new DCC bus in. Live and learn. Okay, you go away. Okay, shiny new wire going in. And now I have a red Sharpie and a black Sharpie. And I'm going to go around here on the roadbed and mark where I want to drop feeders down from the rails to that DCC bus. And the funny thing is, if you'd asked me a week ago which was the outside and which was the inside rail, I would have said, I always put red as the outside rail and black as the inside rail, just like I did on the Barlow Pass layout. Well, I just came to realize on the Goldfield and Calico, I switched them. So black is the outside and red is the inside. It doesn't matter, as long as I can keep it straight. So the idea is to basically have feeder wires for every section of track, approximately every 3 feet. And that way there's no interruption in the power or the DCC signal, and we're not relying on things like rail joiners and turnouts to keep the power flowing through the rails. The engine house track will have its own dedicated feeders. On these Pico turnouts, you always want to run the power from the point end down here, never from the frog end of the turnout. If you run the power from the frog end of the turnout, you're going to get a short circuit in here, and that's why we put insulated rail joiners on all of these connections right here. And we've got a separate wire that is soldered to the frog, which is appropriately green, as many people pointed out in the last Thunder Mesa video. So I've got this little section of track here between these two turnouts, and that's where we need to connect the feeder wires for the DCC bus. Now things start to get a little bit interesting when we get over to the Y here. We've got our outside rails marked in black, outside, 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 outside over here. But what happens when these converge on this point up here? Well, suddenly this becomes the outside rail, and this becomes the inside rail. So think of it in electrical terms. This is negative and this is positive. All of a sudden, positive going to negative and negative going to positive. That's going to cause a short circuit. The solution is to isolate one of these legs coming off of the Y electrically, completely isolated electrically, and then have a way to switch the polarity. And so I was originally going to use this section down here, down that way, but the wiring in that is a little bit more complicated than if I just used this section going into the tunnel up here. So that is going to be our reversing section. I've already got insulated rail joiners in here, and now we just have to wire it as a reversing section. So rather than mark this red or black, I'm going to mark it with an R on both rails. So now I can wire all the rest of this normally until I get to that reversing section back in the tunnel. Now I need to drill some holes down through the roadbed and the sub-roadbed, every place that I put these arrows. I'm using a 7/64 drill bit, size drill bit, and that's just the right size for the 22 gauge feeder wires that I'm going to be using. I want to get right up as close to the rails as I can without damaging them. Now, if you watched my recent video on wiring the HON3 Barlow Pass layout, some of what I'm about to do next is going to look pretty familiar. But it just goes to show that, it doesn't matter what scale you're modeling in, these techniques, these skills still apply. One thing I didn't show in the Barlow Pass video is cleaning the track before soldering on the feeders. And that's a pretty important step, because one of the secrets to a good solder joint and a good strong electrical connection is to make sure that all the adjoining parts are very, very clean. This is particularly true in this case where I'm using recycled track. So I'm going through with a Q-tip and some odorless mineral spirits and getting the paint off of the sides of the rails where those solder joints are going to be. You can see that gunk coming off there. By the way, if you use mineral spirits for anything, don't pour it in a plastic container. Use a glass or a metal lid like I'm using here, because it'll eat the plastic. And you don't want to pour it onto the rails for the same reason, because it will eventually eat through those plastic ties. You also want to remember that mineral spirits are highly flammable. So take a lot of care while you do this and make sure that they evaporate completely or completely wiped off before you touch the rails with a hot soldering iron. Now for those feeders. This is some 22 gauge solid core wire. And I want to strip off about 3/8 of an inch of the insulation. Put it down through my hole. Then I'm going to bend this wire into L shape like that. And then use the springy action of the wire to hold it in place in the webbing of that rail I-beam. If it doesn't hold in place against the rail, you've pulled too much wire down in there. Just give it a little slack back up in there and make that little loop like that. Then using some 6040 rosin core lead solder and a good hot soldering iron, heat the connection here where the rail and the wire touch. Heat that up for just a second or two, and then hit it with the solder. You know you've got a good solder joint when it's nice and shiny. If it looks dull, that's what's called a cold solder, and it's not going to hold and it's not going to conduct electricity very well. Once that cools a little bit, pull the wire down through the hole until just about all that's sticking out is the stripped portion of the wire, and you can't see the insulation. And then once this is all painted and ballasted, it'll be really hard to find these connections. Sometimes the far rail can be a little challenging. Learn how to work upside down and backwards. Then down here underneath, I'll be using these Scotch lock connectors to hook the feeders up to the DCC bus. These just slide on to the larger wire, that 14 gauge wire. And then you feed the smaller wire, the 22 gauge wire, into this upper hole. And for those of you who've worked on cars, I know this is nothing new. And then you crimp that with a pair of pliers. Good and hard. Then you fold that down and it's locked. No stripping, no soldering, no fuss, no muss. Pretty easy. By the way, if those don't lock easily into place, that might mean you need to crimp that down a little bit more. Just give it a good squeeze with the pliers. It should snap easily. On a DCC layout like this, there's really not much reason to do traditional block wiring like you would do on a DC layout where you've got individual blocks that are powered by toggle switches like this one. And that's because in DCC it's the digital signal that controls the locomotive. So you can have multiple locomotives going in different directions on the same track if you want to. However, there are special instances where you might want to do that to add a block, and this is one of those. I want this engine house track to be a separate block so I can turn the power off to this track. I don't necessarily want to have power running to this track all the time when I've got locomotives in the engine house or whatever when I'm running the rest of the layout. I just want the option to be able to turn it off and on. So I'm going to interrupt one of the wires between the track and the DCC bus with a single pole, single throw on-off switch. I'll connect the red wire to the bus as usual. But this time the black wire will go to one of the terminals on this little toggle switch. And then a second length of black wire gets connected to the other terminal, and then this end goes to the DCC bus. So we've created a little break in that circuit with an on-off switch. So I can turn the engine house track on or off, depending on how I want to operate it. And eventually there's going to be a whole, this will be all where all the controls for the layout are going to be located for the most part. So just putting this toggle switch here now in anticipation of that. And I'll just mount this in place here temporarily with some of this 3M industrial strength double stick foam tape. And that'll be a good reminder to get that control panel done. Now remember, every leg of the Y gets wired normally, except for this one back here from these insulated rail joiners back. That's going to be our reversing section. Well, I'm making the last of the straight connections, that is the non-reversing section connections, here under Geyser Gulch. This is kind of momentous. Pretty soon the Thunder Mesa layout will be running again. It's been a long time. It's been too long. I have missed it. Really hope I guessed right on which rail these wires go to. I guess I'll know in a minute. The next thing I need to do to make this Y operational is have a way to switch the polarity on this isolated section of track I've laid back here. The easiest way to do that on a DCC layout is with one of these automatic polarity reversing units. This one is from MRC, Model Rectifier Corporation, though there are other ones out there. And what they do in a nutshell is they detect a short circuit on that isolated section of track. Say your locomotive comes on from the other direction and this one, the polarity is reversed. It's going to detect that short circuit in just milliseconds and switch the polarity of that section of track before it can short out your whole system. Great little invention, super easy to hook up, and that's what we're going to do right now. On this MRC unit, the yellow wires go to the rails, and we don't need to worry about which side is which in this particular case. This little unit doesn't need to be up on the control panel or anything. It kind of does all its work behind the scenes, so I'm just going to mount it right here to the bench work. And then the red wires get hooked up to the DCC bus, and again, it doesn't matter which one is which. I'm just going to make sure this wire that's coming in is pushed all the way in so you get a good connection. And now it's time to juice all of those frogs. And no, I don't mean in a blender. That would be gross. No, of course, I'm talking about juicing the frogs on the turnout, bringing electrical power to this thing right here. That's the pointy part where the diverging route and the main route of the turnout come together. And this little board right here is what's known as a frog juicer. Got this from Duncan McCrae over at Tam Valley Depot. He's got a lot of amazing stuff on his website. I'll put a link below. You can check it out. If you're into model railroad electronics, you'll be a kid in a candy store down there. This is a 6 frog unit. He calls it the hex frog juicer. And you can see it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 terminals up here that we will be attaching the green wires from those frogs to. And then here is the DCC in right there, which will connect to our DCC bus right there. This works in very much the same way as that polarity reversing unit I just put in that it detects, it uses microcurrent to detect a short circuit, and then within milliseconds switches the frog polarity to match the direction that the power is flowing. Makes operations so much better, so much more pleasant when you're not having locomotives stall on the frog, especially if you run a lot of short wheelbase locomotives like I do on the Thunder Mesa layout. This is a must-have in my opinion. Even though these Pico turnouts are great, you know, once you start to paint them and ballast them and things like that, you're not going to have reliable electrical power coming to these closure rails all the time. So this solves that problem. Can't wait to get this installed and see how things run. But before I show you how I wire these up, let's hop in the Wayback Machine so we can have a little review on how I hook the wires up to the turnout frogs in the previous episode of the Thunder Mesa build, you know, because these Pico turnouts, they don't come this way. I use Pico ON30 track and turnouts throughout the Thunder Mesa and the Goldfield and Calico layouts. If you plan to have polarity routing here from the frog, say from a frog juicer or something like that, or a switch machine, and that is to connect a wire to the frog. The nice thing about these Pico turnouts is you can solder this wire basically anywhere on the frog and get the same result electrically. So run this up through here. That should do it. Well, now that we're all up to speed, the only remaining question is, where do I put this thing? Because this can go just about anywhere as long as it's not too far away from the turnout frogs that it's controlling. It can go underneath the layout, hidden away. It can be part of the control panel. I think what I'm going to do is mount it right here for now. Our little impromptu control panel here, a little temporary control panel, and that way you'll be able to see how everything hooks up and how it works. This has 4 screw mounting holes. I'm just going to use the top 2 for now. Nice feature is it also has rubber bushings on the back, so you don't have to worry about screwing this in too close to your control panel or the board or whatever, and damaging those electronics. The first connections I want to make are to the DCC wiring bus. And once again, I'm using the black and red 22 gauge wire here, but in this case, it doesn't matter which is inside and which is outside. Just trying to keep things pretty and consistent for the most part. I'm going to start with the frog on this turnout over on the Goldfield and Calico that connects to the Thunder Mesa layout. I've run the green wire from the frog down underneath the benchwork out here to the frog juicer. We're going to call that one frog number 1. Number 2 is coming from this first turnout that will go out to the wharf. And the next one comes from this turnout going into the Y. And then the one from the engine house spur. So just going down the line from right to left. This is number 5 from the Y turnout back at the tunnel portal. We just want to give those a little tug to make sure you've got a good connection. Last one, number 6. That's from this turnout in front of the depot. Now, before I power everything up, I want to let you know that I have been testing all of the components and all the connections as I go along. with a multimeter. That's a very important thing to do to avoid damaging your equipment. Okay, switching on. Here goes nothing. Now I'll give the track a very thorough cleaning and we'll test everything out with a locomotive. Okay, I've got locomotive number 4 up here on the engine house track. This is a Bachmann 440. It's one of my favorite engines. And the plan here is just to run it through all of these turnouts and change directions on the Y. So when we come back, we'll be facing the opposite way. Facing the opposite of the way we started. I love it when a plan comes together. And as the locomotive moves through all the different turnouts, these indicator lights change when the polarity switches on those frogs, so you can see that everything is functioning. I also need to test my switch to the engine house track. Right now it's in the on position. And now when I give that locomotive a little steam, it should not move. Oh, no signs of life. Everything works. But wait, there's one more bit of technological wizardry I want to show you before we wrap up today, and that's how to hook up the NCE Power Pro wireless cab to the power cab system. I haven't used this wireless cab in over a year, so I'm putting some fresh AAA batteries in. This wireless system has two components. You've got the wireless transmitter with the antenna sticking out, and you've got the Power Pro cab, and the flat cable coming out from the transmitter. This is going to hook up to that panel where the power cab hooks up. Here on the NCE panel, you can see that there are two jacks here. One is for the power cab itself, and the other one is for an additional cab, or in this case, the wireless transmitter. So we just plug this in like so. Now I'll find a better spot for this transmitter in the future, maybe behind the backdrop or something. But for now, I'll leave it right here to test things out. And if I'm remembering correctly, the way we power this on is by pressing and holding the horn button. There it goes. Next, I want to make sure I have the proper locomotive selected. So I hit select and then the number for the locomotive. In this case, it's number 4. Okay, and you've got your indicator light here that says it is in the forward direction position. I want to change that to reverse. There we go. Now the little red light is over the R. And we'll give it a little throttle. There we go. Works like a charm. I really enjoyed using this wireless cab on the old version of the Thunder Mesa layout, and I'm looking forward to using it again on this new version that I'm working on. It makes operating the layout so much more fun. You don't have to worry about plugging in cabs into panels around the layout and moving them around. You don't have to worry about tripping over cords. You can move around the whole layout. And the only downside is that sometimes I would misplace this thing and forget where it was. So I got to keep an eye on it. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. It feels like we covered a lot of ground, got a lot done. Trains are running again on the Thunder Mesa Mining Company layout, and that is exciting, at least for me. Thank you all so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll be back next week with another installment of the Thunderbird Route 66 themed layout that I'm working on with Gary Beatty. And I hope you'll tune in for that. I hope you're subscribed with those notifications turned on so YouTube will let you know when the next video is coming from Thunder Mesa's studio. And in the meantime, you can also follow over on Patreon for free. That's patreon.com/ThunderMesa, or become a paid member if you are moved to do so. You can also follow on Instagram at thunder.mesa and check out the resources available on the Thunder Mesa Studio website. That's thundermesa.studio. As always, a great big thank you and shout out to our Patreon members who make these projects and these videos possible. Until next time, keep moving forward, everybody. Adios for now.